There is a guy in the Netherlands who goes by the name of Chris, and he sits at his computer and casts a few spells. At the other end of the spell comes out a few of my favorite RPG books of all times. For example, there is Remarkable Inns and Their Drinks, there is Remarkable Shops and Their Wares, and now there is Remarkable Cults and Their Followers. But I'm not going to review this one today because I want to talk about this other brand spanking new book that I'm even more excited about, which is Wondrous Expeditions, Forests. Hi there fellow role players, welcome again to the new studio. This is already the third video in the new studio and I'm super happy to be here, and today I'm going to talk about Wondrous Expeditions, Forests by Loresmyth. Loresmyth has absolutely outdone themselves. He creates really beautiful books. He started with this very thin book that was Remarkable Inns, which was really great, and he now is creating some of the most beautiful books ever created. So there's two things I want to do today with this. As first, I want to talk about physical copy real quickly to tell you why I absolutely love it. It's just brilliantly made, and then I want to open the PDF and show you a few things that I absolutely like about it and what you're actually getting when you get Wondrous Expeditions Forest. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we go on, I want to quickly say that this week is probably the last week that you can pick up the physical edition of my adventure that I've written with JVC Parry, because we're closing down orders for the physical edition probably this week or next week. So if you want to get your hands on this, or the dice that come along with it, or the Dungeon Master screen that comes along with it, and you want to support me in the process, make sure to click the link in the description below. When I first laid eyes on Wondrous Expeditions Forests, I was absolutely immediately starstruck. Now, it has all the things that a good RPG book needs, right? It is created by Loresmyth, one of the industry best creators for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition content. It is written by some of the best names that I have known in books so far. It is created by Chris. It has great artwork, like really original and great artwork. It has all of that stuff. But that's not the reason why I was immediately in love with it. The reason I was immediately in love with it is its interior design, its layout. It's not per se the artwork that is in there, but it is the way the artwork is introduced in the book and placed in the book that absolutely stuns me. Let me just quickly clarify. So from the first pages alone, when you open up this thing, you get this really nice interior cover thing where there's like leaves here and it just pops, right? And there's the Loresmyth logo over here, and right here there's like, don't just roll to hit, forge myths. It's really cool to open a book that has like a sentence like this. Really like intrigues me. You really get into the feeling of that forest stuff. And then they have like the page where the credits are, and they lead it off with this like this elk type creature that has a rider, like a ranger type rider on it. The elk type creature is completely battered up and bruised up, and they are riding it, and it just really sets the tone for what the book is and what you can expect from the book. And then even the table of contents pops, like the everything is really clear, and then vaguely in the background you see this dude climbing for his life because there is a really weird creature trying to drag it down and eat it. And then there's just the pages, like the artwork, like the artwork is not just slapped in there. It is absolutely makes sense. It is just a little bit to the left right here, and they leave some space right here. And all of like the way the layout is designed for this book feels really fresh and new to me. Before I summarize what you actually get when you buy this book, it is really important to state that they have a badge on here that says for any tabletop RPG. And they clarify this by saying for any RPG. The contents of this book are primarily system neutral, and that is absolutely the case. 90% of this book can be used in Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, or whatever fantasy setting you are playing in, and using forests in to traverse with your characters. Now that said, you can really feel the 5th edition vibe from reading this book, and there's a few things that really have like the 5th edition system in mind when they were written, but other than that, they're completely system neutral. Now what do you get when you buy this book? For me, there are three things. The first chapter is basically a Dungeon Master's guide for people who want to run forests. Now, if your players are going from A to B and they have to traverse a forest, or they decide to go on an expedition within a forest, there are a crapload of tips and tricks for dungeon masters to use how to do this, from fast-paced montage moments all the way up to like random encounters and how you want to introduce them and keep your players engaged when they are in the forest, instead of just saying like, who's going to set up camp? I'm going to set up camp. Okay, perfect. And the next morning we go on, right? That kind of stuff, to fill that in with like meaningful role-playing moments. That is what the first chapter is all about. The second chapter is all about creating forest scenes. By that I mean creating your own forest and your own meaningful forest, by first picking and choosing your forest type from a bunch of forest types. There are natural landmarks, the terrain, you need to choose what terrain is in there, the atmosphere, like the conditions, the hazards, the smells, the discoveries, everything you can pick and choose from a random rolling tables to create your own living and breathing forest to pit against your players, basically. Now, these rolling tables are not just a bunch of rolling tables with like one sentence and that's it. No, everything is explained into detail, why you should pick certain things, how certain things work, and it's just written in such a way that you are really, as a dungeon master, creating something special and unique for your players. Then there is a section with 4 pre-written forests, and I'm saying pre-written, I'm not saying pre-generated. These are actually written in amazing detail, like the ground beneath your feet, the type of forest, the smells, the atmosphere, everything, the freaking creatures that live in there, together with their stat blocks. There are original creatures written for these forests that are in this book. It's their stat blocks, their lore, everything is in there for these 4 very unique forests you can just pick up and place in your campaign setting like that. And then there is more, because if that is not enough, there is a complete expedition system, which is basically a roadmap for you as a dungeon master to keep your expeditions interesting and engaging, and to just keep your game moving. It is like a roadmap that you can mark off what you've done and what the next step is to keep it interesting for your players. And then there are 3 pre-written adventures for your players in this beast of a book. So you probably already caught my drift about how incredibly detailed this book is, and the amount of content within. It's roughly 150 pages, but there is just so much going on, and the value is insane. Now, the joke's on you if you didn't get the physical book, because you're not getting the very beautiful 2 filler pages that in the physical book are between the first pages and the table of contents. I really like those filler pages. There's a printing thing probably, but I really just like it. So the table of contents, as you can see, running forest expeditions, creating forest scenes, wondrous forest, the expedition system, and then there's 3 adventures. And I've talked about like generally what these contents are. So there's so much going on, and I don't want this video to be like an hour long or whatever. So I'm going to just talk about a few things that I really absolutely like. So first of all, running the forest expeditions, as you can see, first of all, there is an introduction, how to use the book and everything, you know, right? There's always that. And then they always have like this full page with like a small piece of artwork. When you find yourself lost, trust your friends to guide you back to the light. So this is all about like how do you run the book? How do you use the book? There's information about the chapters here. And there's something really cool. I think this is really cool. It is the different kinds of travel and role-playing game. They talk about the travel montage version. There's nothing wrong with using travel montage. I use it every now and then. Sometimes if you're good at it, it can even be cool. Like imagine Legolas, the other guy and the other guy, Gimli and Aragorn, they're running, right? So all they do is just pan from the sky, film them while they're running, and have like a joke in between where Gimli is trying to catch up. That's like a travel montage. it can be really cool, but it depends on the dungeon master. Some dungeon masters are like, yeah, you travel a bit through a forest and then you arrive at the waterfall that you were looking for. That's not really a travel montage. Travel montage can be super exciting if you tell it in the right way. There's also the realism approach, which is like every bit of weight you carry, your every ration, all of that stuff, every little detail is being tracked. And then there's the heroic approach, which is kind of basically the in-between approach, and that is basically the approach that I as a dungeon master use. I like people who don't carry too much weight and who keep track their rations and everything, but I don't want to like focus the entire game around those systems. But they go into the Wondrous Expedition system, how it works, how the book works, and just look how the artwork is placed within this book. Is just absolutely brilliant. Then every chapter has this big piece of 2-page freaking artwork. Look at this. There's this Yeti. It saw this campfire right here, and it's probably like, there's a campfire there, so there's probably people there that can eat. And there's like 3 people, just like the hobbits in the first Lord of the Rings movie, are behind a rock, and they're just like, oh shit, we attracted a Yeti by having a campfire. So it's really awesome. So they have this entire, it's really hard to explain what exactly it is. This is basically a dungeon master's guide to running forest expeditions. And with forest expeditions, they mean not only like going into a forest looking for something, but it could also be, oh, we need to travel through this forest in order to go to a castle that's not in the forest, but we need to travel through the forest because it's the shortest way, and all stuff can happen, which is also in this book a forest expedition. And they talk about how goals and expectations, establishing goals. And for example, there's a table here where they give you an example, like the players might have a certain goal, and they give you an example how you as a dungeon master can create a subversion of that goal in order to make the game more exciting and have like these mini plot twists almost. For example, the goal might be to recover an item, right? And then it says the subversion could be the item has already been recovered, stolen, or even destroyed. Their goal could be to meet somebody, but then their contact is captured or killed, or someone unexpected. They might be the villain from previous story, stuff like that. Now, other things they talk about is like, this is really interesting right here, how your players prepare their journey, because this is something I really miss in D&D right now from a lot of players. Like in the olden days, people were really like, oh, we need to go fight a green dragon, and they would go to the library and to the town and everywhere, ask around about green dragons. And these are like the tables you can use. For example, if your players researched the topography of the terrain of the forest they need to traverse through. An example, a specific terrain that requires specialist equipment or precautions. So they learn about stuff if they research certain stuff, so about foraging, hazards, so you as a dungeon master can give that to them or hint towards stuff like that when they research that. Like for example, they could go, there's an information source thing here, they could purchase a map from a local cartographer that has a detailed description of the forest. This could provide the characters with a map that has 1d4 plus 1 landmarks detailed on it. Another interesting one is the first one. Talk to local woodcutters about the trails they use to transport their timber. The benefit could be advantage on checks made to navigate while on a trail for 1d4 plus 1 days. There also could be false information, there could be helpful information, all that stuff is in here. There could be slowing factors while walking, fatigue and moral factors, surprising factors. I'm not going to go too deep into that. This is also a really interesting part. Here's the elk again, by the way, but just the other one was mirrored, and now this one is mirrored in the other direction. Like how far you can, this is how far you can travel in miles per day when you move at a certain pace. There's common travel ways, uncommon travel ways, and wondrous travel ways. For example, if you run, you could do 48 miles a day. But you can have no expedition activities, impossible in difficult terrain, and you have to make an exhaustion check each hour that you run. There is a dragged vehicle, which is always impossible when not on a trail, limited expedition activities, miles per day, all that stuff. But if you go down here, you can travel on a giant elk, like the picture next to it, or similar huge beast, 48 miles per day, typical carrying capacity, 500 pounds, limited expedition activities. So they talk in the text, they talk about what that limited expedition activities and all that stuff, what that means, but it's just really handy to have as a dungeon master. So this is kind of like a dungeon master's guide, like a guide that helps you to run your players through a forest without just being, hey, your players go through a forest, right? So there's also crafting roles, like expedition roles you can give your players, the crafter role, the hunter role, navigator role, forager role, all that stuff. There's waypoints. Yeah, it's just really lucky breaks. Right? You discover a spot full of aromatic medicinal herbs and plants. The materials can be brewed into 1d4 healing potions. And these are all tables. You can just roll a d20 and be gone with it. It's just easy enough. There's not a lot of rules that go with that. It's just, yeah, you can create 1d4 healing potions. Period. Like, you as a dungeon master can be like, yeah, 1d4 healing potions. You roll the 3. Okay, it will take you like 1 day to create 3 of those healing potions. Or it will take you 1 hour. Or it will take you 3 days. It's your freaking game. You can do whatever you want. And there's so much more to this chapter. For example, there are role-playing encounters that you can get with like little quest hooks with an optional twist. For example, a caravan of clerics arrives, or you pass them, and their quest hook is to find a lost holy relic within the forest. The optional twist could be the relic is keeping the forest alive. So stuff like that. I don't know how the people who wrote this came up with the stuff, but it is in here. Then there's all kinds of stuff about like survival, foraging, and crafting. You catch a moose, you catch a wolf, you kill a wolf, a rabbit, an elk, whatever you can get from that. I really like this piece of artwork, like what all kinds of stuff you can build from like catching one animal. Me as a vegan finds that really disturbing, but also really entertaining. Foraging, like flowers, magical flowers that have healing effects, but there's even magical flowers in here that can heal somebody who is blind, like make them unblind. There's for against headache and stuff like that. So it's really cool to have all that stuff within one book, and it is incredibly detailed. There's also like stuff like defensive survival tactics. Like one of the most standard survival tactics in a forest or a mountain or wherever is light a freaking fire, right? So the purpose of lighting a fire is always to keep to get light and heat, of course, but always to keep common beasts at bay. So like most beasts, like wolves and hounds and rabbits and snakes and other creatures, they don't like fire. Beasts and animals don't like fire, but the potential downside could be a boulder monsters or intelligent residents will know your location. So really interesting to have those kinds of stuff. I'm really like going through this really fast. I know there's all kinds of stuff about summer, autumn, winter, and then yeah, there is even a part about like the arrival, like rest up your tired feet, for the expedition is finished. Think back on the challenges and hardships you faced, and remember it is not about where you've been, but the wonders you've seen. Really cool that these little bits of text and quotes are in there, and it really gives the book like, I haven't seen a lot of books that have the same kind of feeling that really feels magical while you're reading it, and this one really nails that. Chapter number 2 is all about creating forest scenes, and they give us a few common forest types and uncommon forest types. For example, of common forest types is tropical dry forest, swamp forest, littoral forest, and uncommon could be bamboo forest, cloud forest, crystal forest, fungal forest, stuff like that. And they give us it's almost like a stat block, a cheat sheet for each forest type. Like every forest type that they talk about in this random rolling table to the left, they have a stat block to the right that just sums up what that forest is in a way like really easy to read. What kind of monsters there are, for example, in a colonizing forests. There could be elementals, young dryads, giant centipedes, squirrel folk. The terrain is moss fields, raging rivers, blah 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 blah. The landmarks could be elemental fountains, forsaken boundary, lake, chasm, and geysir. So all of this stuff is talked about within this section, what all of that stuff means, and I just really like that they have like the small sheets for the forest, so you as a dungeon master can quickly go back to that part and be like, oh, I need a quick monster that makes sense for this forest. You just go to your cheat sheet and just look at that stuff. Then they go deeper into the unique forest terrain feature like moss field, humus ponds, elemental confluences, blah 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 blah, canopy roots. It's all explained in the next session. Like everything that's in this table is also explained right here, which is really interesting. And they just explain this, what you can do with it, and maybe an extra effect that it can have for your game, which is I really absolutely like. They talk about landmarks, common and uncommon, and so on and so on. And to keep myself from scrolling through the entire book and just showing all the contents to you, here is a part of chapter number 3, like the pre-written forests, and I just picked one out, which is the forest of Carbion. Like you see, there's all kinds of stuff, quick reference stuff about what this forest is all about, just to give you a general idea whether or not you want to use it in your campaign. And there's all kinds of just pre-written stuff, but there's also these random rolling tables to make it really your own, or to make it unique, or to make it random, right? So they talk about this as like almost a mini campaign setting that is the forest. If you, I like to compare this like to the old Margrave from Kobold Press, where they have an entire book about like one certain forest. This is basically what they do. It's like a little bit smaller, of course, but it's basically what they do. But the cool thing is, like they talk about the creatures that live there, and they have new monsters, and I really like the way they did this. They have a quick reference sheet, a part for new monsters. For example, the griffon flies, right? Its type, large beast, unaligned, special ability, which I cannot pronounce, mental, weak, physical, strong, magical, weak, right? But there are no stats. The stats are in the back of the book. You can find a full stat block in the back of the book. So they give you the artwork, and they give you like a quick reference sheet to see if you want to use it, to get like a general idea of, oh, I want to use this monster without having to look through an entire stat block in order to know if you want to use it. There is lore about, like a small piece of lore about those creatures, and you can see whether or not you want to use them. There's quest hooks for this particular kind of forest, and I really like that they done this, that they included this in the book. So for those kinds of dungeon masters that really want that plug and play kind of stuff, it is right here. And then there are the appendixes, and the first appendix is the expedition system, which does not belong in an appendix. It should be a chapter of its own because it's really great. The expedition system is an entire system that you can follow, like rule per rule, or like point per point, and mark off almost like what you're doing to make it interesting for your players to traverse a certain forest. They keep track of the loyal score of your players, moral score, sorry, of your players, the effect it has if you have low morale or a high morale, the expedition difficulties. There are a saving moral save check. Moral save check is an expedition difficulty plus waypoint modifier. There's an entire system behind this. It's not a difficult system at all. You just need to read about it. It's just really easy for you as a dungeon master to follow this system, and it's just like all about like temperature, what it does, what strong winds do. Yeah, there's roles within the party: the camper, the crafter, the entertainer, the forager, hunter, lookout, navigator, scout, trainer. And there's even like this sheet that you can follow, like plan, travel, stretch. Then there's a waypoint or your arrival. If it was just a waypoint, then they go to a next stretch, all the way to the final stretch, all the way to the final destination. I really like this section in here because it kind of summarizes what the entire book is, but within one section, easy to use, easy to understand section for a dungeon master that just wants to run it. And then there are 3 pre-written adventures you can play and pit against your players. The first one being the Route of Sylvanus, which is basically a situation where dwarves found really interesting gems in the in the floor and like the ground of a forest, and they start digging and they are completely destroying the forest. And there is this spirit called Sylvanus who is completely pissed off, so he built like a wall of roots around the dwarves, entrapping the dwarves and also trapping the players with the dwarves. And this spirit wants to kill the dwarves, but the fairies of the forest don't want to kill the dwarves. They want to see the dwarves leave peacefully, and there's kind of like this choice from the players. The players can help the dwarves leave peacefully, or they can outright like kill the dwarves and be done with it. And there's so much more in this content-packed book that I've not talked about, and the stuff that I have talked about is most of the time way more nuanced than I'm doing in this review, but I don't want this review to take like an hour or like freaking 45 minutes or something. Here are, by the way, stat blocks for the creatures they talk about through the book. New stat blocks with great artwork. You've got that. There are maps for certain encounters and certain situations in the book. There's all kinds of different stuff you need to discover for yourself after you pick up this book for yourself. And I want to leave the review there, but I am going to revisit this book a few times across the next coming weeks, because I have a video series where I generate random stuff from random rolling tables, like cities, like inns and other stuff. And I want to use this one because this one is filled to the brim with random rolling tables to create random stuff for your Dungeons and Dragons game, or any tabletop RPG for that matter. So we will get back to that, see how it works for your game, or at least for me, for my game. And until next video, bye bye.